On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, the federal buying machine grinds to a halt and creating one door for vendors to knock on. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. Week number 3 of the federal government shutdown begins Wednesday at 12:01 a.m. The federal government spending flow is starting to dry up now. Joe Jordan is president and CEO of Actiparo. He's former administrator of federal procurement policy. Alan Thomas is owner of Alpha Tango Strategies. He's former commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service at the General Services Administration. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining me. What is starting to dry up now, Joe, and what is still flowing dollar-wise as the shutdown continues?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Francis. So, shutdowns are messy and inefficient and unhelpful, but what you've got now that we enter week 3, as you said, anything that isn't multi-year appropriation, programmatic no-year appropriation, things like that, agencies who squirreled a little bit of money away for that first 2-week period are really going to run dry. And so it's incumbent on contractors and folks who normally provide goods and services to the federal government to manage their cash flow, because invoices aren't being processed in a timely fashion, and that can have a real trickle-down effect on kind of the entire federal supply chain.
Unprocessed invoices are already starting to impact vendors, I imagine, Alan.
Oh, they are, actually. I have a small business client who just the other day said, hey, I've taken out a line of credit for the first time, right, because I'm concerned. I don't need to draw on it yet, but I am concerned, right, that I might have some unpaid invoices and I need to pay my staff, right? So I might have to dip into that line of credit to do it. So particularly small businesses are going to start to feel it.
At what point can we expect to see small businesses that just decide this is too much and we can't take it anymore?
Well, I think if you're a small business and your primary client is the federal government, I think they're going to hang in there quite a long time, right? And probably go to extraordinary measures, right? Would be my guess. But for the government for a while now has been saying they want to attract new entrants, right? Folks who have good ideas in the commercial sector that are innovative, right? They want to bring them into government. So if you're kind of new into government and this is your first taste, this might leave a bad taste in your mouth. As the Secretary of War said, this is a bad look for the federal government.
Well, that's where I wanted to go next, that the long-term impact on the contracting base, especially the defense industrial base, after the government said for at least 15 years that I can go back to, Alan, we want more companies to come in. We want diversity in the base of all types. And it doesn't strike me this is a great way to go about doing that.
No, I mean this is uncertainty, right? And if you're a small business and this is a market, but not your only market that you're looking at, right? You might look at this market and say, I don't know if that's something that I want to play in, right? If I'm going to have this sort of perturbation in the market, maybe I pull up stakes and just focus on the commercial side of my business.
Are you hearing that from the vendors that you work with, Joe?
Oh, absolutely, Francis. Yeah, it's tough. And I think Alan hit the nail on the head that a lot of businesses who are primarily federal contractors are going to try to suffer through this. And so I would encourage them to track all of their expenses from stop work orders and related kind of government inefficiency, because you can sometimes submit a request for equitable adjustment and get some of that money back if you've survived this period. But those innovative tech businesses that we need to stay one step ahead of our adversaries in the Department of Defense, or to improve the service delivery to our citizens through the non-defense agencies, if they're largely a B2B business and they were looking at this like many of Alan and my clients do, this is not helpful for the government or the country.
Mm-hmm. What's the best possible outcome at this point for a company that's trying to figure out how to navigate through this, Joe?
Yeah, so again, tracking your expenses that are shutdown related, managing cash flow because of the invoice processing timelines we talked about, clearly communicating with your employees, because look, there are 600,000 furloughed federal employees, so client communication to your federal customer may be fractured, but your employees are scared and worried about what's going to happen to them too, and that sort of communication can be really important. And then just make sure you understand what your obligations are in each of your contracts, so that you're able to follow those.
There are still some folks in your former agency, Alan, at General Services Administration, that are still on duty and responding to the flow that still exists. What's that like in your view to try to deal with folks from the contractor perspective who they know are not getting paid and are are operating under kind of adverse circumstances right now.
It's tough times for all. I like Joe's response there, where he said focus on people. If you're running a business, right, think about your employees and communicating with them. I would say that from both the government perspective and the vendor perspective, keep talking to each other, right? People sort of remember like the best of times and the worst of times, right? And so keeping those relationships up, I think, is important. My guess is folks at GSA are still communicating with people in industry, right? Look, this is not unprecedented. There have been shutdowns before, right? Joe's been through one. I've been through one, right? That have lasted longer than what we're currently in. Mm-hmm. The forecast looks a little bleak now, but this is not unprecedented, right? So people have some sense for how to manage and work through this.
Joe, what should companies start to think about now, anticipating at some point, theoretically, the agencies will reopen and work will start to ramp up again? What should vendors be thinking about now to prepare for that effectively?
Yeah, to continue the theme about how much of this is human, understand that your federal customers, when they return to the office and get settled in again, which hopefully will happen. I know there are rifts that the current administration is contemplating. They're going to have a lot of catching up to do. Mm-hmm. And so you as a business owner are going to want those invoices processed fast for good reason, so you can pay your suppliers and your employees. You're going to want to know about that next contract. You're going to want to know, based on whether it's continuing resolution or a new omnibus appropriation, what contract, what needs does that understand that the people you're talking to are already going to be overwhelmed on those first couple days. And so have a very collaborative tone to re-engaging your federal customers. And then again, continue to manage that cash flow, because it usually takes a while for this whole process to kind of get through the snake, so to speak.
Alan, how can I help you? Sounds like the best way to sum up the advice that Joe just gave.
I think that's right. Sometimes the best help is, hey, when we're back, don't send me an email on Monday. Send it to me on Tuesday, right? Because my inbox is overloaded on Monday, right?
Right. As people get back, and especially on the government side as they get back to work, you've both been through this before. What did you learn when you came back to the office, Alan? I'll start with you, that maybe you weren't expecting once to get back to when you turn things on again?
So for me, it was a little bit different situation. Because when I was at GSA, I ran the Federal Acquisition Service. They were a revolving fund, right? The Acquisition Services Fund. So we hardly furloughed anybody. And what was technically the longest shutdown in history, right? 35 days was a partial shutdown. So GSA was in a little bit different position. We did, I would say, take care. GSA services other agencies, essentially, right? Agencies are GSA's customers. Many of those folks were on furlough, right? So while many of the folks in the Federal Acquisition Service didn't have to go anywhere and continue to work and get paid, they had to be a little bit sensitive, right, to their customers. I think the message we gave was, hey, we've been doing everything we can while you were away to make sure that your programs stay on track. Right? And then so when people got back, we felt like, we were a little bit of a force multiplier for them while we were out. So I was in some sense lucky in that I didn't have a bunch of people who were on furlough.
Mm-hmm. Joe, what did you learn from the 2013 shutdown?
Yeah, so our shutdown was 17 days, and I was at the Office of Management and Budget at the time helping run the kind of execution of that. So when things got turned back on, day one was actually my first day off in almost 3 weeks, and I had a young kid at home, so I took a nap for a second. and then what I would say is the takeaway is, like, the week or two after, how quickly the federal employees, with the help of contractors out there, were able to get operations back to normal, a state of normalcy. Mm-hmm. Folks really did come together and understand that a budgetary disagreement between two parties in Congress is not about the agency's ability to execute its mission or the importance of that mission. And I was really impressed with how quickly both federal employees and their industry partners got things really going again.
Do you think there's a multiplier there, that amount of ramp-up time that's required is exponential? 17 days was your shutdown. Yeah. 35 was Alan's shutdown. If this one goes more like Alan's than yours, is that going to be harder to get back up to speed after it's over?
Yes. It's not exponential, in my opinion, or in what we've seen, but there's a multiplier effect. So on October 14th in that 2013 shutdown, you're hitting the semi-monthly payments, military payments, folks who are furloughed or missing their first paycheck. And that's when kind of Congress broke and said, okay, we want to work something out. It took them 3 days to put together a continuing resolution that Speaker Boehner could get through the House, but that was it. Well, we're now at that point. Mm-hmm. If we get through the next 72 hours and remain kind of in this not really speaking and negotiating standpoint, I worry it will be at least Halloween. And yes, it therefore takes a longer amount of time. Federal employees their concerns are exacerbated. Their true financial impact and harm is exacerbated. And back then we said, when you come back, you will get paid. So it's managing the cash for the period of the shutdown. The current president said, well, we've looked at that. We're not sure that is the case. So think about what they're going through. And yes, each additional day, week that goes by, I think takes their mind off, okay, when I'm back in my seat, how do I get my agency pumping again?
What does that mean potentially for the long-term operations of organizations like FAST, like OMB, and others across the government, Alan?
Well, I think there's a little bit of a psychological toll. If you're a federal employee, it's been a tough year, shall we say, right? With a lot of change. And this to me sort of feels like the icing on the cake, if you will, right? So I think Joe's point is well taken, that there's just a little bit of a different climate out there. So even when people come back, they might not be in quite the same frame of mind, right, that they would have been in a different environment, and that certainly can take a toll on an organization. I will say, look, federal employees, by and large, are mission focused, right? They really like their work. They identify with it. I think most of them, when they get back, when the shutdown gets resolved, and it will, they'll be back and they'll be putting in full effort, right? But I think you do have to take into account a little bit the kind of overall climate, right? Which is a little rainy if you're a federal employee. Let's be honest.
Yeah. How do you respond to that as a leader, Alan? One of the best. I'm not even talking about policy or governance. It's, I guess, the soft skills is the term that a lot of people use about how you interact with those people to help them understand that you want them to feel like you appreciate the work they're doing.
Yeah, look, if I was in a chair right now in the government, right, I would be focused on saying, look, we've been through a pretty significant period of reform, right? And the focus has been on trying to create a government that works better and costs less. You're here. You're an important part of what we're doing. Need you on the team. Need you to play your role and be excellent at your role, right? So you can be for change. You can be for reform, but you've got to also be for the people that are on your team. And I think that would be an important message for a leader to deliver when everybody's sort of back and things are up and running again.
Seems like you like the sound of that, Joe.
I agree with everything Alan said. The only thing I would add is during the period of shutdown, I hated the phrasing essential and non-essential personnel. That is not what it is. You are exempt from the Anti-Deficiency Act, or you are not. And yes, it has to do with your positions, influence on protecting life and property. But make sure you're not playing into that narrative and creating this division within your workforce of people who think they're essential and people who fear they are not. And then once you're back, I would say exactly what Alan said. I thought it was great.
Okay. I know that maybe you don't want to do a prediction. Joe will do anything I ask him to. How long do you think?
After Halloween, first week in November.
Yeah. Any thoughts, or do you want to pass?
Veterans Day.
Wow. That's a long one. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. It's great to have both of you on the program.
Thanks.
Alan, Joe, appreciate it. You can read more about acquisition during and after the shutdown on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, creating one door for vendors to knock on. FedGov Today with Francis Rose. We'll be right back.
You have data coming in. How quickly can we process that, intake, analyze, and put it towards an end product that actually helps, the agency or any given agency? And I think that's extremely crucial in the law enforcement community. Think about how quickly they can process information and get that to something usable. That could be a difference between life and death.
Everything now is automated to the point where if a police officer pulls someone over on the side of the road and uses a mobile fingerprint device, within seconds they can identify that person that's in front of them. So really the advantages that we have had in the courses of the last really 10, 15 years, the advancements in technologies has really helped us to make sure that our officers are safe and that we're being more efficient in the processes that we're expected to perform.
Welcome back. Some of the federal government's acquisition issues that you heard about a few moments ago won't go away after the shutdown. Experts who've been on both sides of the government-industry equation say some of the work the federal government's doing on acquisition now will help a little. Jordan Burris is head of public sector at Socure. He's former chief of staff to the federal chief information officer at the Office of Management and Budget. Jordan, welcome. Thanks for joining me. You're writing about this issue on LinkedIn, and you write, bureaucracy isn't the problem. The real challenge is that government has no single buyer. What does an ideal single buyer posture look like in your view, or is that even possible given that agencies have such different needs, different missions, and so on?
So Francis, first and foremost, thanks for having me on the show. It's interesting, when I was writing that piece, that part for LinkedIn, I was thinking through my own journey and what led me into government service in the first place. I was working in industry, and I had this thought and premise of, like, how does it all work? Is there a way that I can get better insight into what goes into the decision calculus of a government buyer? When I then entered government, I learned that very quickly there is no single buyer within government. Imagine, and for those who are familiar with how industry operates, imagine that for every single transaction that takes place, there is a board that effectively has to approve it. And that's what I discovered, right? It's less of a single person who's empowered to run it all, and instead it's a coalition, if you will, of those who are representing procurement, those who are representing the CFO, the CIO, mission and program owners, and then, of course, legal bodies, each one of them with their own veto authority at that.
So what does that create for the agencies themselves when they try to buy more effectively, and what can ameliorate that? What can get folks closer to this idea that you have of one door for people to walk through?
That's right. So what it creates is a need to align incentives, if you will, right? And in many cases, when it comes to procurement, those incentives are not aligned. And so what happens then in practice is that you'll have these requirements that are perhaps written by IT, and they have in their head of kind of the commercial technology that they may be wanting to engage with or what they want to bring on board, but then you slap on top of it a series of requirements that are in the FAR, and in many cases equate what would be SaaS products to buying toilet paper, and then that you get a recipe ultimately that leads to ineffective procurements being levied or run by the government, which ultimately doesn't get them to their core of the outcome. And it really speaks to the differences between how, in some cases, the private sector has grown accustomed to operating and then how the federal government in many cases operates today.
So that list of stakeholders, you outlined that in the LinkedIn post. We'll put a link to that in the show page today so people can see it for themselves. But you listed all those stakeholders and the reasons that they are involved in buying decisions. And that was what jumped out at me as I read that list, is what happens when those are at cross purposes, when the goals of one of those stakeholders doesn't align with the goals of the other stakeholders. What have you seen from both sides of the government and industry side equation when that happens?
Yeah, in many cases, procurements just don't happen, right? So it's think of it from the standpoint of even like what's happening today with the government shutdown and how it's occurring. When folks get back to work, there's many emergency, if you will, procurements that were slotted to take place. And then, unfortunately, the reality is that weeks cost months in the life cycle, right? There's going to have to now be a balance and trade-offs of all the new slate of priorities that likely will be coming on top of the existing work that's ultimately, or that has to get done. And then what you then have are stakeholders that are pushing, if you will, in many cases, in different directions, not because they're opposed and they don't have the same ultimate goals. It's just that their incentives aren't driving them effectively really what is to the same conclusion at the same moment in time.
Is it possible to realign those incentives to get it so that everybody's pulling in the same direction?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's something that we've long debated, especially during my time in government, working with a number of leaders. We have to move and shift and continue to push from moving from a culture or a design where compliance leads the conversation, and then you hope for outcomes afterwards, right? Like that's technically where the federal government is today in many of the ways that the FAR and others have been written. Instead, one that's pushing more towards that elusive conversation on ROI and what can be achieved. And ultimately what it takes is rethinking who ultimately should be responsible for making some of these decisions. If you walked into a private organization or a commercial organization today, there is the ultimate buyer. That's the person who is effectively going to drive the decision down, if you will, everyone's throats and make sure that it is accomplished and it happens. And then they also have the flexibility to work with other stakeholders to move things as appropriate. Some of that added complexity with compliance as we have it today makes this near impossible within government. And don't get me wrong, there are a number of leaders who continue to push the bounds of what exists today. But for me, it really starts with taking a kind of a broader look into how we've approached things historically, finding a way that compliance doesn't necessarily lead the day and that we move things towards more of a performance-based mindset, so that way you can manage speed appropriately, and then helping with some of those, long elusive incentives, such as things like the color of money, which have impacted a number of procurements today.
So you've cited some of the holdups. What are some of the solutions that you see potentially to be able to remove some of those holdups, to get these incentives aligned with each other and make this process easier, and therefore it sounds like make it easier for industry to work with the government too?
That's right. So I'm actually intrigued, and as part of engagements and other things, about what General Services Administration and others are doing related to the OneGov strategy in particular. That's something that has been tried time and time again. It's interesting to see the government actually pull its weight. I remember we used to have this conversation as related to engagements with Microsoft at one point in time of like how we would manage licenses. And the reality is that what it looks like for the federal government to approach a company, an entity, and say, hey, you'll just deal with us, you'll deal with a single buyer, if you will, and then we'll make the technology available to all those who have interests, so that way you can potentially streamline what would be acquisitions, then getting everyone on the same page. I think there's also kind of this reality of what needs to take place related, and I was mentioning the color of money, is that there is no single allocation of budget to an agency, right? For the $1 trillion+ that are spent at the Social Security Administration, for an example, it's not as if there's just a lump sum that's given to them and the ability to manage. Whereas if you're looking at the commercial world, it's very much the ability that in times of flex or times of need, you can repurpose money for other items in order to support the outcome that you're ultimately driving towards. I would actually have a harder look as to why have we continued to operate under these predefined categories for spend, and then what flexibility could be driven there, because then that in and of itself may help loosen, if you will, or make more available some of the more advanced decision making that would go into structuring the procurements of the future.
You and I have talked before about the fact that the CIO's best friend should be the chief financial officer and the chief acquisition officer, and it sounds like this is just reinforcing or another example of why that's the case.
That's absolutely right. So today, each one of them has their own decision-making authority, even all the way down to the program and mission level, right? And in many cases, the program mission owner may be, hey, I need to get benefits out the door faster, or I need to make sure that I'm complying with this new piece of legislation that has evolved, and the CIO is thinking about what makes the most sense technology-wise for the organization, where they are in their maturity, and what's furthering their roadmap. It's all about getting them all on the same page, right? This can be driven by the top of the organization, from the secretary or the administrator on down. But in many cases, it's really getting all the stakeholders to this table at the same time, right? I've always found the success, especially coming back out into the industry standpoint, is getting all these stakeholders aligned up front, having the hard conversation of what does it take to better serve the American public and meet mission outcomes, and then ultimately, how are we then better helping you defend against the things that you're subject and accountable to. For an example, yes, many public companies today have their finances scrutinized, but not everyone is going to have to stand up and defend their decision in an acquisition, right? Or protest really a thing in the private sector. However, that's what happens in the federal government day in and day out when a contract is being set up, right? There is kind of this rethinking and defensive posture that many leaders have to take. And so by giving them the tools in order to have more of a proactive conversation about this is why we've taken made the choices that we have, it puts them in a better position to ultimately meet their ideal outcomes.
30 seconds left, Jordan. If short of a one-door approach for the entire federal government, Would a good incremental step be for an agency to do that within its own bounds and make sure that all the acquisitions are only going through one spot inside that agency?
Absolutely. And so I am a firm believer of, incremental thinking and using it to scale progress, right? I believe that every single agency should consider what that would mean for them. It doesn't have to be even agency-wide. It can be a small bureau, a component, a program office. But the idea here being is taking those learnings and then scaling them broadly. And by doing so, taking and such that not every group has to learn the same painful lessons, because there will be tons of learnings along the way. But in doing so, they can ultimately, build a better government that operates for the future.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
You can find a link to Jordan's LinkedIn post that sparked this conversation on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. You'll get more advice and guidance on dealing with the shutdown and preparing for the eventual reopening of government on the FedGov Today podcast this week. More leaders like the ones you saw on this program who've dealt with past shutdowns will tell you what you can do now to make the shutdown and restart work as well as possible. You can follow the FedGov Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else you get shows. And you can listen anytime at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in a moment.
How do we solve our nation's biggest challenges? Precision, speed, honor. No manual, no roadmap, no problem. Launching AI in orbit, using XR on the battlefield. Stopping fentanyl at the border, making America stronger, safer, faster. It's who we are and how we lead. Booz Allen, it's in our code.
I think about, that ability of AI to drive efficiency, and sort of take over the functions that human operators are performing today. And I'll take one potential application of it, in the software supply chain security space, Imagine the ability to analyze your code base across an enterprise, look for risky or vulnerable code, identify a mitigation, and then deploy an AI agent to remediate that software and get it back to a production standpoint without the need of having a human in the loop.
A lot of times it's not until they see it, touch it, feel it, use it, do they actually understand what the capability is. A prime example of that for me is artificial intelligence. So using AI to augment and support decision making, sift through mountains of data, sensor data, information, you name it, whether it's ELINT, SIGINT, you name the source, but being able to sift through that in short order and come up with something that is actionable, that you can give to a decision maker, and then getting that information to a trigger puller, whether that's an air breather or on the ground, or you have it in a timely fashion, is what it's all about.
FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.